I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Santa Maria from Aporta Games. Santa Maria is a tableau building game across 3 rounds of play for 1 to 4 players, in which players are slowly building out their own personal board while figuring out the sequence of activations, dice placement, and building activation that will most efficiently result in the gathering of resources and said shipping off of resources for points. That may have sounded like a lot. It's not actually that complicated as we go through it. But the general idea of the game, like I said already, is it's a tableau building game across 3 rounds of play. Every single round you're going to take 1 of 4 actions, which is nicely illustrated on this board over here. You can either go ahead and buy one of these tiles, adding it to your board. That's the first action you could take. A smaller tile will cost 2 wood, a larger tile will cost 2 wood and a wheat. That's printed on the back of it, but it's also listed over here in the action area. From there, you can go ahead, once you've done that as an action, you can go ahead and take this, you put it down somewhere on the board, and you figure out, well, we'll talk about why you're doing that in a second, but that's the first action you could take. The second action you could take is you can spend silver in order to activate a building. So for this example, I can take this 1 silver, and I can go ahead and put it down in this building, which will go ahead and give me 2 silver back. The problem is the next building I activate will cost me 2 silver, then 3 silver, and so on and so forth. So as you're spending money to activate buildings, just be mindful of the fact that it's slowly going to increase more and more. So for example, this next building, I'll spend 2 silver, and this will let me move up 1 on this track over here, on the little prayer track as I go through there. The next building will cost me 3 silver, so on and so forth as you go through it. Generally not the most efficient thing to do off the bat, but we'll talk more about why and how you're managing your tableau. The third action you could do is dice allocation. Now there's 2 kinds of dice allocation. There's the personal die you have your own personal die you're going to roll at the beginning of the round across each of the 3 rounds, and as you move on this track, whenever you cross the 2 and the 3, you're going to earn more dice. You can have up to 3 blue dice in play, and yes, if you're good enough at what you're doing, or if you tactically plan around it, you can have all 3 dice even in the first round of play. You're going to have those dice, you're going to assign them, and when you assign it to a row over here, when you assign one of the blue dice to a row, as you can see the blue dice along the edge over there. So for example, if I assign this die, let's say this 2, over here, I can activate all the buildings on this row and have it come to a rest on the last building it activates, with an exception. So for example, I can slide this along the row and I can activate this building, which will give me a wood and a movement on the prayer track, which is great. The only problem is this building's already been activated, so I will no longer be able to activate this building. In general, once a building has been activated, if there's something on the building, you can't activate it. And the keywords are if there's something on the building. So for example, let's just play out 2 possible options of the play order over here. Let's pretend I hadn't activated any buildings yet. Let's start with my basic silver over here. If I went ahead and I activated this building by paying 1 silver, I would get the 1 wood and the 1 prayer point. And then later I go ahead and activate this, and I skip this building and activate the 2 silver. So in other words, I would get 1 each. Versus, if I activate the die first, I can activate this building, and then get the 1 wood and the prayer point. Let's move the prayer point along, let's gather the 1 wood, putting it into my little area over here, and then I keep sliding that 2 further until I hit the 2 silver, adding 2 silver to my supply, and then later I can spend that 1 silver to reactivate that building, getting again a 1 wood and a prayer point. So in other words, you cannot activate the last building the die last landed on, but you could double activate buildings the die landed on before. In fact, I can do you one better. Let's take that step back. Let's go ahead and undo that spot over there, and let's not activate that. So we activate this die over here. Then in a future turn, we activate one of these dice from the common supply. That's going to go under this action here where you activate a row or column. Now these dice anyone can take, so it's kind of first come, first serve, although you are limited to taking 3 dice. It's 3 dice per player, but I'm going to grab this 3, activate this column, activate that 1 wood, the 1 silver, and the 2 silver, and then after that, activate this one over here. In other words, with the right combination of actions, you can activate a building multiple times as you slide dice along the row, along the column, and finally put something on top of it. In this particular example, I was able to activate it 3 times as I went through it, but if you have enough dice, if you have the right dice, you can activate even more depending on your board setup. So those are the first 3 actions of the game. Again, just go through one more time. You can buy a new building thing that will go onto your board. You can activate buildings. You can slide dice along the rows or columns in order to get those buildings. And lastly, you can pass. When you pass over here, you're going to go ahead and take your marker, putting it on one of the passing objectives, one of the passing options over here. So for example, I'll go ahead and take 2 silver, and then you'll activate any of the buildings you have shipped things to, any of the ships effectively that you have shipped your goods off on as you go, which might not make a lot of sense because I didn't really cover how that plays out yet, which is a good time to cover your actual board over here to cover the main actions you have. The actions you have are usually gathering resources. These are going to be coins. These are going to be some wood over here. We have some whatever these bags are, plus some wheat. Over here you have a single person in a row that's relevant for scoring. Over here you have the prayer points, which will let you move along this prayer track, which will do two things. It gets you your second and third blue dice. Also, whenever you move along this track, you can pay a week to move one extra. But also, whenever you cross these little monk symbols over here, you'll gather one of your monks, and you'll be able to put it into either an ongoing ability, this is an in-game ability that you have access to that will give you something you can do, or end-game scoring on these 3 tiles. And these tiles are variable, you mix them up game to game. Or lastly, these 4 tiles where you can simply take the resources shown. And being the first person there is helpful because the other people who go there have to pay to the people who are already there. So there's 10 different spots you can go to, and you have 6 different monks, but where you go and which order you activate things in does matter as you go through it. Then there's going to be this little racing track over here, which as you move along this track over here, as you cross certain thresholds, you're going to be getting gold, which is effectively a wild resource, but also is worth points in rounds 1, 2, and 3, depending on the player count, is worth points for whoever's furthest along the track, or even second or third place as you go through it. And then lastly, we have the shipping action over here, which is where you're going to ship resources you've acquired to these various boats in the harbor. Now these 4 over here are the starting boats, and for example, let's pretend we take a shipping action. Let's pretend we activate this one, we move along this column, we take a shipping action, followed by a wood action. So we'll gather a wood. First we do a shipping action. So first we have to go ahead and ship this wood to the supply and take this boat. And then we are going to go ahead and add another wood because we landed on a wood. Now when we take a shipping action, we're going to look at the specific, the harbor that the ship is docked at. In this case it's this harbor. And we're going to put it into our matching harbor over here. You're going to get the points shown on that tile at the end of the game. But in the game, as an end of round income, when you pass, you also take the income from your boats, which is either going to be 2 money, a movement along the Conquistador track, a movement along the prayer track, or a happiness point, which is basically points over there in the game. Depending on the more boats you have there, the more you're going to get. So if you have 3 boats on money and 2 on the prayer track, you're going to get 6 money, and you're going to get 2 movement on the prayer track every time you pass. That is basically the game. There's only other things to go into our technicalities around the specific, tiles, what they do, some of these, trade-in of bonuses you have. But effectively in the game, you're going to be taking actions until you can't anymore and you have to pass. Those actions are buying new tiles to put into your tableau. They're going to be actions that you can activate buildings by placing money on them, actions which you can slide dice along the row or column to activate all the buildings in that row or column, having the dice stop on the final one, and then passing where you get a bonus, plus activate all the ships in your tableau. You're also going to be scoring points at the end of the game. You're going to be scoring points for every 3 money is equal to another point. You're going to score points for your people. The rows and columns, completed rows and columns are worth a point for every person in them. You're going to score points, 3 points for every set of boats you have, so every set of different types of boats you're going to score 3 points for, and lastly you score the actual points on your boats themselves. Some of these in-game abilities also have a few points on them, 1 or 2 points on them, not a lot, and then these can be chunks of points. You lose 2 points for even going here, but depending on what you do, you can get far more than 2 points back. So for example, over here, if you fill a 5x5 grid on your board, you're going to get 10 points, which is a nice chunk of points as you go through the game. And that is how you play Santa Marina. 3 rounds of play, taking actions, primarily building out a tableau and then activating that tableau in increasingly stronger and stronger actions, gathering monks as you pass this track over here in order to place them down in different regions, gathering dice as you pass this track, and then being mindful of this track over here where you're going to get gold and also points, and that track resets every single round, and that is Santa Maria. Which brings us to the review, starting off with ease of play. Ease of play overall, this is a pretty easy to understand and get into game. The rulebook is a handful of pages, not a lot was confusing, it's fairly straightforward, and plays in, I want to say, around 45 minutes to an hour. The box says 45 to 60 minutes. I don't think it's good. I guess it can be AP prone. It can be prone to analysis paralysis, so I could see the 90 minutes happening if you're taking your time with it. But I think it's probably going to fall more commonly into that 60-minute range as you play through it, although player dependent because of that analysis paralysis aspect. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking in the game, first of all, the primary puzzle to me that I enjoy the most is that tableau activation over here. The fact that depending on the way you build out your tableau, depending on what goes into your tableau in different areas, you're building out rows and columns that are more efficient and more ideal to activate, that are going to give you more exchanges, more activations in there. But it's not just about that, because it's also about giving you that spot for a die to rest. Placing this die over here means that this will slide all the way to the end, and I'll be able to get those 3 activations. If I can get another 3, and by the way, you could pay to change the value of a die, if I can go ahead and take this and slide into a 3, I can go ahead and activate that row and column again. Then I can continue sliding dice along this edge over here to be able to activate all of those, and then still finish them off with coins. There's a lot of puzzly decisions to be made as far as how you most efficiently gather resources, but gathering resources in and of itself is not good enough. That's not where the points come in this game. The points come in as you go ahead and ship those resources to the boats that are going to be entering the harbor, increasingly more expensive boats that want more from you but reward you with more happiness points in the game, and then slotting those into your end of round bonuses so you can further double down down on all the things you're getting, there's a fun little tableau of in-game actions, of gathering more dice, of gathering monks to give you one-time bonuses or in-game actions, of putting things onto your board, of being able to use those resources to build a better board, or to ship more things for points, while being mindful of all the peripheral end-of-game points, the in-game races, and all of that. There's just a lot going on in a fairly simple activation puzzle that comes down to sliding dice along rows or columns and figuring out the most efficient way to do it. There's a lot of the whole puzzle is about your tableau, and it works very well as far as giving you a lot to go through. And then, of course, there's the polyomino aspect of even building out your board and trying to figure out, well, if I really want this action here, but if I do that here, if I do this here, it might be harder to be able to get, like over here, I'm going to have to get 2 of the 2s, which is slightly harder, but if I go this over here, I might be able to put this one over here, and that could be really helpful to be able to slot that in. But I'm also trying to get the 5x5 grid because of that, which is slightly going to change the way I approach this. So what if we put this over here? That's going to give us a very strong 2 column to go through. There's a polyomino tableau building puzzle in this game that is very rewarding. It's the primary thing that the game is doing, and it works very well as far as making you feel clever when you find the right sequences to make your tableau thrive as you go through the game. As far as what I don't like in the game, 3 rounds doesn't leave a ton of room for some of the tableau building elements. The idea that as your ships enter harbor, you get rewards for them, well, there's only 3 rounds of play. In your first round, you have to struggle to get things going, which means your second and third round, the third round, what you gather is kind of for endgame, so it's primarily the second round where you get the most buzz out of your end of round activation. So 3 rounds feels like a drop too short in terms of giving you what you need. Obviously, if you add a 4th round, though, the game is going to last much longer because it already escalates a lot in terms of how much you can get done every single round just because of your tableau growing and giving you more activations, and the sequence and the order of the activations matters so much as you go through it. So it's a weird balance where there's tableau building and 3 rounds feels a drop too short, but 4 rounds might make it outstay its welcome at the same time. I would say as well that, to me, as much as I like what this game is doing, in terms of the puzzle of the tableau that you're building, it very much does feel like a one-trick pony. It feels like the one thing that's happening here that is really, truly compelling is the order of how you activate this board and how you build out and make this board work. And it does that well. It does. But to me, it's a game that the more I dive into it, the more I play it, the more I feel like even with the different scoring tiles and ability tiles that show up game to game, there's not a lot to change the core essential mechanism of what this board does. Now, it's worth noting here, there is an expansion that comes with like 4 or 5 modules. I've briefly read the rules of some of them. I have not played with any of the modules, and so I don't know how that changes or impacts the experience, but that might be the difference of what it takes to move this game from being incredibly good at one thing to having more depth and more strategic options at your disposal. I really like what it's doing, but like you'll notice in the section of what I like, there's kind of one thing I focused on, and it's a one thing that works really well, but it is one thing that works really well, as opposed to a full encompassing ecosystem that is very rewarding. As far as I can see others not liking, this game can be very thinky in that min-maxing aspect of trying to figure out the right order and columns and sequence to maximize your tableau, and that is something that I find rewarding and crunchy, but it can slow down players who are spending a little too much time trying to think through how to do, what to do, and how to get the most out of their actions. If you don't see those patterns well, you're either going to spend a lot of time puzzling through things, or just not have as a rewarding enough of experience. And secondly, and somewhat obviously, the theme may be a turnoff as well. This game does lean very heavily into a conquistador theme with like happiness points and things, and it does push a little much in the theme, and it might be the kind of thing that wouldn't fly quite as much nowadays, but yeah, theme might be a turnoff for you. As far as final thoughts on the game, overall, I really like what Santa Maria is doing, with the caveat that it has one thing that works really well for me, and that's kind of it. To me, this is a 3.5 out of 5. I like the system. I like building your board. I like puzzling it out. But it's the kind of thing that once you do it 3 times, you kind of like, okay, great. I kind of want to see more in this engine, because this on its own is compelling, but it's compelling to me a handful of times. It's not compelling to last 5, 10 plays down the road. I am intrigued as to what the expansions add. I've already read through some of the rules. Some of the modules are more or less complicated, and some seem to add more or less depth versus little mini games, like this little governor mini game that you're trying to move them from like one corner to the bottom corner, and I don't know if I'd quite enjoy that as much, versus other tiles and abilities in the game do seem interesting. So the expansion does have a lot of things that are there. If you are someone that is compelled by this game or enjoys this game in any way, the expansion might be worth looking into to see what it adds to the experience. But again, this review has not played, I have not played the expansion, so it's not really being accounted for in this review past the awareness and acknowledgement of its existence. A 3.5, A very solid, very compelling mini game, but that's kind of where the game taps out for me with what's going on here. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Raj of the Ganges. Raj of the Ganges to me gives you another dice placement game with your own little mini board that you're also building out in a very different puzzle. To me, I actually enjoy this mini board far more than what's happening in Raj of the Ganges, but the overall ecosystem of Raj of the Ganges I just find more enjoyable. That's an example of where you have more things happening and interweaving in a way that overly produce a more interesting overall experience. And then secondly, Glass Road. Glass Road, I don't necessarily know why I think the two are comparable, but it does give me a similar feeling of a fairly quick game with fairly crunchy decisions as you figure out what to do and what to build things out, but with more baked-in variety just due to the nature of the buildings in Glass Road. I find that's a game that holds up to repeated plays more, at least for myself. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this review helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.